Listen up, history buffs and cat lovers, because I'm about to blow your mind with one of the most absurd chapters in human stupidity. You think cancel culture is new? The medieval church literally canceled cats. Yes, those fluffy murder machines that currently rule the internet once found themselves on the wrong side of papal bulls, ecclesiastical paranoia, and good old-fashioned superstition. We're talking about an era when the most powerful institution in Europe decided that whiskers and toe beans were basically Satan's calling card, leading to a feline genocide that would make any modern conspiracy theorist say, okay, that's a bit much. Now here's the good news. Cats are magnificent creatures that have been humanity's companions for thousands of years, controlling rodent populations and occasionally deigning to sit on our laps. The bad news? The Catholic Church spent centuries convincing people that these pest control experts were actually demonic familiars, witches' accomplices, and harbingers of evil. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into how religious zealotry, mass hysteria, and spectacularly bad public health policy combined to create one of history's most catastrophic own goals. Spoiler alert, killing all the cats didn't exactly work out great for anyone, except maybe the rats. The relationship between humans and cats goes back about 10,000 years to the Fertile Crescent, where wildcats figured out that hanging around human grain stores meant easy pickings on mice and rats. Humans, not being complete idiots, recognized a mutually beneficial arrangement when they saw one. Ancient Egyptians took this partnership to the next level, literally worshiping cats as sacred animals and mummifying them for the afterlife. The goddess Batet, depicted with a cat's head, represented protection, fertility, and home. Killing a cat in ancient Egypt could get you the death penalty, which seems extreme until you remember that cats were basically keeping the entire agricultural system from collapsing under rodent invasion. Fast forward to medieval Europe, where cats had spread throughout the continent as both working animals and companions. They were particularly valuable in monasteries and granaries, where their hunting skills protected precious food stores and manuscripts from rodent destruction. Medieval people weren't stupid. They understood that cats served a vital ecological function. But here's where things get interesting. Cats have always been independent, nocturnal, and vaguely mysterious creatures. They move silently, their eyes glow in the dark, and they seem to operate on their own inscrutable agenda. To superstitious medieval minds, already primed to see demons everywhere, these traits started looking less like useful pet and more like possible servant of darkness. The church's beef with cats didn't emerge overnight. It was a slow burn of theological paranoia mixed with cultural prejudice. Early Christianity had inherited some baggage from both Roman and Germanic traditions, where cats were associated with pagan goddesses and fertility cults. The fact that cats were so closely linked to Batet and other pagan deities didn't exactly endear them to Christian authorities hell-bent on stamping out every trace of pre-Christian religion. Additionally, cats' independence and refusal to be controlled fit poorly with Christian ideals of obedience and submission. Dogs were man's best friend because they followed orders. Cats did whatever they damn well pleased, which is basically the opposite of Christian virtue. Pope Gregory IX enters our story in 1233 like a villain in a very unfortunate historical drama. This is the guy who issued the papal bull Vox in Roma, which officially declared that cats, especially black ones, were associated with devil worship and satanic rituals. According to this document, Satan could appear in the form of a black cat during heretical ceremonies, and witches used cats as their familiars to carry out evil deeds. This wasn't just some obscure theological opinion. This was official church policy coming from the top. Gregory essentially gave his blessing to cat killing across Christian Europe, and boy, did people take that message to heart. Historians estimate that millions of cats were killed over the following centuries, thrown from bell towers, burned alive, and tortured in public spectacles. Now, let's be clear about what Vox in Rama actually said, because the details are somehow even more bonkers than the summary. The document described alleged satanic rituals performed by heretics in Germany, claiming that Satan appeared first as a toad, then as a pail, emaciated man, and finally as a large black cat that worshippers would kiss on the anus. Yes, you read that right. But kissing was apparently part of the satanic package deal. The document went into lurid detail about these supposed ceremonies, feeding into popular fears about devil worship and heresy. Whether any of this actually happened is highly doubtful. It reads more like fevered fantasy than investigative reporting. But once the Pope said it, it became truth for millions of believers. The timing of this anti-cat campaign couldn't have been worse. And here's where historical irony reaches almost cosmic proportions. Just over a century after Gregory's Bull, Europe was hit by the Black Death, the bubonic plague that killed between 75 and 200 million people between 1347 and 1353. This plague was spread primarily by fleas living on black rats, those same rodents that cats have been controlling for millennia. By decimating the cat population, Europeans had essentially removed their best defense against the very creatures that would bring demographic catastrophe. It's like declaring war on your immune system right before flu season. Except instead of the flu, it's the worst pandemic in human history. And instead of getting sick, 1/3 of your entire continent dies screaming. Some historians argue that the cat persecution wasn't the sole cause of the plague's severity. And they're right, because medieval sanitation was already a nightmare, and nobody understood germ theory yet. But it's hard to overstate how much the reduced cat population contributed to the rat problem. Medieval cities were already filthy, with garbage and human waste in the streets, creating perfect conditions for rats to thrive. Cats were one of the few things keeping rat populations somewhat in check. Remove the cats, and you've got a rat explosion. Add plague-carrying fleas to those rats, and you've got a recipe for apocalypse. The Black Death killed so many people that it took Europe 200 years to recover its pre-plague population levels. All because someone decided whiskers were demonic. The cat persecution didn't end with the Middle Ages. If anything, it intensified during the early modern period with the witch trials. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft across Europe and the American colonies, and cats were frequently caught up in the hysteria. Women accused of witchcraft were often said to have familiars, supernatural servants in animal form, with cats being the most common. Black cats especially were seen as demonic helpers, and owning one could be used as evidence of witchcraft in trial proceedings. This wasn't metaphorical. People were literally tortured and executed partly because they fed neighborhood strays. The logic was circular and self-fulfilling. Witches have cats, you have a cat, therefore you're probably a witch. The persecution of cats during this period took forms that would be considered horrifying animal cruelty by any standard. In medieval and early modern Europe, cats were routinely thrown from church towers during festivals, burned alive in wicker baskets during celebrations, and tortured as public entertainment. In France, the tradition of burning cats alive on St. John's Eve persisted until the 18th century, with King Louis XIV himself reportedly lighting the bonfire in 1648. These weren't isolated incidents carried out by sadistic individuals. They were community events sanctioned by both religious and secular authorities, treated as wholesome family entertainment. The screams of burning cats were considered auspicious, a way to ward off evil and ensure good fortune for the coming year. But here's where things get interesting in terms of class and social dynamics. The cat persecution wasn't universal or evenly distributed across society. While the church officially condemned cats and peasants participated in ritual cat torture, wealthy aristocrats continued keeping cats as pets throughout the medieval and early modern periods. Paintings from the Renaissance show nobles with their pampered felines, suggesting that the anti-cat hysteria was primarily a middle and lower class phenomenon. The rich could afford to be superstitious selectively, keeping cats while still publicly endorsing anti-cat ideology. Meanwhile, the poor and working classes who most needed cats for pest control were the ones most likely to participate in cat killing, essentially destroying their own best interests while the elite looked on from their cat-filled states. The irony deepens when you consider that some of the most powerful people in the church were simultaneously condemning cats while benefiting from their presence. Monastery cats were an open secret throughout the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Monks needed cats to protect their precious manuscripts and food stores from mice and rats. Yet they had to reconcile this practical necessity with official church doctrine declaring cats to be demonic. The solution? Cognitive dissonance and convenient blindness. Monastic cats were rationalized as working animals rather than companions, their presence tolerated as a necessary evil rather than celebrated. Some monasteries even kept official records of feeding their cats, documenting expenditures for cat food, while simultaneously copying manuscripts that condemned felines as satanic. The mental gymnastics must have been exhausting. The Protestant Reformation didn't exactly help cats either, despite breaking from Catholic authority on virtually everything else. Martin Luther, the guy who nailed his complaints to a church door and told the Pope where to stick his indulgences, was no friend to felines. Luther associated cats with the Pope and Catholicism itself, which in his mind made them doubly damned. He wrote that the cat was the devil's favorite animal, and claimed that Satan appeared to him in the form of a cat during his spiritual struggles at Wartburg Castle. When you're so committed to opposing Catholicism that you accidentally agree with them about cats being evil, you know religious polarization has reached peak absurdity. The result was that Protestant regions continued persecuting cats just as enthusiastically as Catholic ones, proving that humans can always find common ground when it comes to being terrible. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, cats were living their best lives, which really highlights how culturally specific this madness was. The Prophet Muhammad was famously fond of cats, with numerous hadiths describing his kindness toward them. One story tells how Muhammad cut off his sleeve rather than disturb his cat Muetza, who was sleeping on it. Islamic law protected cats from harm and cruelty, and they were allowed to enter mosques and homes freely. While Christian Europe was burning cats alive and declaring them demonic, Muslim scholars were writing poetry about their beloved felines and ensuring their welfare. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Same animal, same time period, completely opposite treatment based purely on religious interpretation. It's almost like the problem wasn't the cats at all. The witch trial phenomenon reached its zenith in the 16th and 17th centuries, and cats were dragged along for the ride into increasingly bizarre territory. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches, published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer, became the handbook for witch hunters across Europe. This charming text explained in detail how witches used cats as familiars, could transform into cats themselves, and employed cats in their evil magic. The book was essentially fan fiction about devil worship treated as an investigative manual, and it led to countless deaths of both humans and cats. Women living alone with cats, what we'd now call crazy cat ladies, were particularly vulnerable to accusations. Being an independent woman with feline companionship was practically a confession of witchcraft in the eyes of paranoid communities. The witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts, in 1692 brought this cat paranoia to the American colonies with devastating effect. While the Salem trials are famous for the human victims, less attention is paid to how cats featured in the accusations and testimony. Multiple witnesses claim to have seen accused witches transform into cats or send cat-shaped specters to torment them. The irony is particularly rich here because colonial settlements desperately needed cats to control rodents that threaten grain stores and spread disease. Yet Puritan theology, with its obsession with the devil's influence in everyday life, made cat ownership risky. You needed cats to survive, but having cats might get you hanged as a witch. This was the kind of logical trap that defined much of Puritan existence, where everything necessary for survival was also potentially evidence of damnation. Not all of Europe participated equally in cat persecution, and the exceptions are revealing. In Britain, attitudes toward cats were somewhat more moderate than on the continent, possibly because British common law and culture maintained stronger connections to practical agricultural concerns. Cats on ships were considered essential for controlling rats, And British naval tradition held that cats aboard brought good luck, the exact opposite of continental superstitions. Dick Whittington, the Lord Mayor of London in the early 15th century, was legendary partly for his association with his cat, suggesting that British culture retained more positive feline associations. However, even Britain wasn't immune to the madness. Cats were still sometimes killed during festivals, in which trials in Scotland and England implicated cats as familiars. The persecution was less intense, but still present. The scientific revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries slowly began to chip away at anti-cat superstition, though progress was frustratingly slow. As educated Europeans started understanding disease transmission, animal behavior, and natural philosophy through empirical observation rather than religious doctrine, cats began to be rehabilitated in intellectual circles. Scientists and philosophers kept cats as pets and study subjects, documenting their behavior without supernatural hysteria. Isaac Newton allegedly invented the cat door, which suggests he appreciated feline companionship enough to engineer solutions for their convenience. The Enlightenment's emphasis on reason over superstition gradually made cat persecution seem less like pious duty and more like barbaric ignorance. But old beliefs die hard, and peasant communities continued ritual cat torture well into the 18th century. The French Revolution marked a turning point in cats' fortunes, at least symbolically. Revolutionary thinkers associated cat persecution with the superstitious ignorance of the old regime, making pro-cat sentiment almost politically progressive. Enlightenment values celebrated reason, opposed religious fanaticism, and rejected tradition for tradition's sake, all of which made burning cats seem rather embarrassingly medieval. The last recorded instance of ceremonial cat burning in France occurred in the 1760s, and by the Revolutionary period, such practices were viewed as backward peasant customs to be stamped out along with feudalism and religious oppression. Cats went from being Satan's minions to being symbols of independent thinking, which is about as dramatic a PR turnaround as you can imagine. Revolutionary intellectuals kept cats as pets, and feline imagery appeared in progressive political cartoons and pamphlets. By the 19th century, cats were finally staging their comeback in Western culture, aided by changing economic conditions and social attitudes. Victorian Britain became particularly cat-crazy, with Queen Victoria herself keeping cats and attending cat shows, which gave feline fancy the royal seal of approval. The first official cat show was held at London's Crystal Palace in 1871, marking cats' transformation from persecuted demon associates to prized pets worth breeding and exhibiting. The rise of the middle class created demand for domestic companionship animals, and cats' cleanliness and independence made them ideal for urban living. Charles Darwin wrote about cats in his work on evolution, treating them as worthy scientific subjects. Louis Pasteur's germ theory finally explained disease transmission, definitively proving that rats and their fleas, not cats, spread plague. Science had officially vindicated cats after centuries of slander. The rehabilitation of cats in popular culture accelerated through the 19th and into the 20th century. Writers and artists embraced cats as muses and companions. Edgar Allan Poe wrote The Black Cat, exploring but ultimately subverting superstitions about feline evil. T.S. Eliot penned Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, celebrating feline individuality and character. Artists from Edouard Manet to Pablo Picasso painted cats with affection and respect. The development of photography meant cats could finally document their own cuteness, leading to what historians will surely call the proto-lolcat era. By the early 20th century, Western culture had completed a full reversal. Cats went from being burned at the stake to being pampered house pets. The same traits that once marked them as demonic, independence, mystery, nocturnal habits, were now celebrated as charming quirks. But here's the kicker that brings this whole sordid tale full circle. While Western cats were being rehabilitated, the damage done by centuries of persecution was permanent in ways we're still calculating. The genetic bottleneck created by mass cat killings affected European cat populations' diversity. The cultural trauma ran deep enough that superstitions about black cats bringing bad luck persist even today in supposedly rational modern societies. Some historians argue that the Church's war on cats contributed to Europe's slower recovery from plague compared to regions that maintained healthy cat populations. The ecological disruption of removing a major predator from the urban and agricultural ecosystem had cascading effects that lasted generations. Essentially, Europe spent 500 years shooting itself in the foot, then wondering why it couldn't walk properly, all because religious authorities couldn't tell the difference between a house pet and a demon. The psychological dimensions of the cat persecution reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and mob mentality. Cats became scapegoats in the truest sense. Innocent creatures blamed for human problems and anxieties. When the plague hit and people needed something to blame besides their own poor sanitation and lack of medical knowledge, cats were convenient targets. When social tensions rose and communities needed outsiders to persecute, women with cats fit the bill perfectly. The cat persecution was never really about cats at all. It was about control, fear, and a human tendency to create enemies when facing incomprehensible threats. The Church weaponized existing superstitions to consolidate power. Communities participated in cat torture to demonstrate conformity, and individuals denounced their neighbors' cats to settle personal scores. The cats were just casualties of human dysfunction on a massive scale. The medical consequences of the cat persecution extended far beyond the Black Death, creating a cascade of public health disasters that medieval and early modern Europeans somehow never connected to their anti-feline policies. Rats didn't just carry bubonic plague. They also spread typhus, leptospirosis, hantavirus, and a host of other diseases that ravaged European cities for centuries. Without adequate cat populations to control them, rat numbers exploded in urban centers, creating what modern epidemiologists would recognize as a perfect storm of zoonotic disease transmission. Cities like London, Paris, and Rome became rat paradises, with rodent populations sometimes outnumbering human residents. The Great Plague of London in 1665 killed roughly 100,000 people, about a quarter of the city's population, and still nobody thought, hey, maybe we shouldn't have killed all those cats. The economic impact of rat-related crop damage during this period is almost impossible to calculate, but was certainly staggering. Medieval and early modern agriculture operated on razor-thin margins, where a bad harvest meant famine and death. Rats consumed and contaminated grain stores, costing communities anywhere from 10 to 30% of their harvest in a good year, and even more in bad years. This food insecurity contributed to social instability, peasant revolts, and mass starvation events throughout European history. Meanwhile, cats sat in the cultural penalty box, branded as devils, while the actual devils, the rats, feasted on humanity's food supply. The sheer economic stupidity of eliminating your best pest control while living in a pre-industrial agricultural society cannot be overstated. It's like firing your accountant during an audit and then wondering why you're bankrupt. The class dimensions of cat persecution became even more pronounced as we move into the early modern period. While the poor and middle classes continued to view cats with suspicion and participated in their ritual torture, the aristocracy increasingly embraced felines as status symbols and luxury pets. Cardinal Richelieu, the powerful chief minister of France in the 1620s and 1630s, was a notorious cat lover who kept dozens of cats in his palace and provided for them in his will. The contradiction of a high-ranking Catholic official surrounded by animals the church had declared demonic apparently bothered no one in power. This hypocrisy extended throughout the upper classes. You could condemn cats in public, support witch trials that used cat ownership as evidence, and then go home to cuddle your Persian. The cognitive dissonance was resolved through the simple expedient of not thinking about it too hard. Literature from this period reflects the shifting but still confused attitudes toward cats. In fairy tales and folklore, cats appeared as tricksters, shapeshifters, and ambiguous figures, sometimes helpful, sometimes dangerous, always mysterious. Puss in Boots, first published by Charles Perrault in 1697, presented a clever, resourceful cat who helps his master achieve wealth and status through cunning and deception. The tale is interesting because the cat uses morally questionable methods, but is ultimately the hero, suggesting that by the late 17th century, cats were being rehabilitated in popular culture, even as which trials continued. Yet, even positive depictions carried undertones of the supernatural and uncanny. Cats in folklore weren't just animals. They were liminal creatures that existed between the natural and supernatural worlds, which made them perpetually suspicious even when helpful. The peculiar legal status of cats during this period reveals just how confused European society was about these animals. In many jurisdictions, cats occupied a weird gray area between property and pest. They weren't valuable enough to receive the legal protections afforded to livestock, but they weren't quite vermin either. Some laws prohibited killing cats because they served useful functions, while other laws in the same regions encouraged killing them as demonic creatures. Court records show cases where people were prosecuted for cat theft, while simultaneously cases where people were prosecuted for not killing cats suspected of being witches' familiars. The legal system tied itself in knots trying to reconcile practical necessity with religious superstition, creating a framework where you could be legally right and legally wrong for the exact same action, depending on who was prosecuting and what mood the judge was in. The role of cats in maritime culture provides a fascinating counterpoint to their persecution on land. Sailors were notoriously superstitious, but their superstitions about cats ran in the opposite direction from landlubbers. Ship's cats were considered essential crew members, protecting food stores from rats and supposedly bringing good luck and fair weather. A ship without a cat was asking for trouble. A ship with a cat, especially a black one, was blessed. This maritime tradition persisted even during the height of witch trials and cat persecution on shore, creating a bizarre situation where the same black cat that would get you burned as a witch in town was a treasured good luck charm at sea. The practical needs of sailors, who would die if rats ate their food supplies during long voyages, overrode superstitious nonsense in a way that landlocked communities apparently couldn't manage. Eastern Europe and Russia developed their own unique relationships with cats during this period, somewhat distinct from Western European patterns. Russian folklore featured cats prominently, often as magical creatures, but not necessarily evil ones. The cat Bayun of Russian fairy tales was an enormous, intelligent cat with a hypnotic voice that could put people to sleep or even kill them with its stories, but it wasn't demonic in the Christian sense. Orthodox Christianity never launched the same systematic anti-cat campaign that the Catholic Church did, possibly because Orthodox theology had different attitudes toward animals and the natural world. As a result, Russian cities maintained healthier cat populations and arguably suffered less from some of the plague outbreaks that devastated Western Europe. When you're not burning your pest control alive, you tend to have better public health outcomes. Who knew? The Ottoman Empire's treatment of cats during this same period offers yet another stark contrast to Christian Europe's madness. Istanbul became famous for its street cats, which were fed and cared for by the community as an act of piety. The Turks built small cat houses and feeding stations throughout the city, an endowment specifically designated fund for cat care. Travelers from Europe to Istanbul routinely commented with amazement on the abundance and good treatment of cats, often contrasting it favorably with the situation back home. These observations were written during the 16th and 17th centuries, the same time European communities were throwing cats from bell towers and burning them in public squares. The message was clear. The problem wasn't cats. It was Christian Europe's specific brand of religious hysteria. Other cultures managed to coexist with felines just fine while maintaining their faith and social order. The intersection of cat persecution and gender persecution reveals some of the darkest aspects of early modern European society. Women, especially older women living alone, were disproportionately targeted in witch trials, and cat ownership significantly increased their risk of accusation. The archetype of the witch with her black cat reflected deep-seated anxieties about female independence, and sexuality. Cats were associated with femininity. Both animals were seen as mysterious, sensual, independent, and potentially threatening to patriarchal order. A woman who lived without male supervision and kept cats was essentially broadcasting her refusal to conform to social expectations, making her a natural target for communities looking to punish deviance. The persecution of cats and the persecution of women were intimately linked, two sides of the same misogynistic, superstitious coin that valued conformity and control over everything else. The Enlightenment's impact on cat rehabilitation was significant but uneven across Europe. French philosophes championed cats as symbols of independence and rational self-interest, perfectly embodying the Enlightenment ideal of the autonomous individual. Voltaire kept cats, as did many other prominent thinkers who saw cat appreciation as a mark of sophistication and progressive thinking. However, this pro-cat sentiment remained largely confined to educated urban elites. Rural communities, where literacy rates were low and traditional beliefs held stronger sway, continued to view cats with suspicion well into the 19th century. The Enlightenment created a cultural class divide where educated city dwellers embraced cats while peasants still participated in ritual cat torture at local festivals. Progress, it turns out, doesn't distribute evenly, and the benefits of rational thinking took a long time to reach people who had been taught for generations that cats were devils. Scientific advances in the 18th century began providing concrete evidence that vindicated cats and exposed the folly of their persecution. Early epidemiologists studying plague transmission noticed that areas with healthy cat populations suffered less from rat-borne diseases. Agricultural scientists calculated the economic value of cats in protecting grain stores, putting actual numbers to what farmers had intuitively known all along. Naturalists like Georges-Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, studied cat behavior and anatomy, describing them as sophisticated predators perfectly adapted to their ecological niche rather than supernatural entities. The accumulation of scientific knowledge slowly made it impossible for educated people to maintain the old superstitions, though popular culture lagged behind. By the late 18th century, killing cats was starting to look less like pious duty and more like ignorant barbarism, at least among the literate classes who read scientific journals and attended salons. The French Revolution's aftermath saw Napoleon Bonaparte contribute to cats' rehabilitation in an unexpected way. Napoleon famously hated cats and was allegedly afraid of them, which actually helped their cause because his opponents used his ailurophobia as evidence of his tyrannical nature. Pro-democracy pamphleteers portrayed cats as symbols of independence that tyrants feared, flipping the old script entirely. If the dictator hated cats, then cats must represent liberty. This is almost certainly giving cats more political significance than they deserved, but it worked. By the early 19th century, owning and appreciating cats was becoming associated with progressive, Republican values in France. The symbolism would have been lost on the cats themselves, who were busy being cats regardless of human political drama, but it marked another step in their long journey from persecuted demons to beloved pets. The Victorian era's obsession with cats transformed them from rehabilitated outcasts into cultural icons, though this transformation came with its own peculiar forms of exploitation and commodification. The rise of cat fancy, the organized breeding and exhibition of cats, turned felines into living art projects for the middle and upper classes. Breeds were developed and standardized, with cats judged on arbitrary aesthetic criteria that had nothing to do with their natural abilities or well-being. Persian cats were bred for increasingly flat faces that caused breathing problems. Siamese cats were prized for their distinctive coloring, but also for their exotic origins, feeding into Victorian Orientalism and colonial fantasies. The same society that had burned cats alive a few centuries earlier now bred them in shapes nature never intended, which is honestly just a different kind of cruelty dressed up as sophistication. The industrialization of the 19th century created new roles and challenges for cats in urban environments. As cities swelled with factory workers and industrial infrastructure, rat populations exploded to unprecedented levels. Factories, warehouses, and tenement buildings became rat-infested hellscapes, and suddenly cats were back in high demand as working animals. Victorian London employed thousands of cats in an unofficial pest control capacity, with businesses and homeowners actively recruiting cats to patrol their premises. The irony is delicious. Industrial capitalism, having created conditions perfect for rat infestation through overcrowding and poor sanitation, then had to rely on the same animals the church had spent centuries demonizing to make those conditions livable. Cats went from demonic familiars to essential infrastructure in the span of about 50 years, and nobody seemed to notice the whiplash. The development of modern veterinary medicine in the 19th and early 20th centuries marked another milestone in cats' journey toward domesticity and acceptance. Before this, cats received essentially no medical care. They lived or died based on their own hardiness and luck. The establishment of veterinary schools and the professionalization of animal medicine meant that cats, for the first time in European history, were seen as beings worthy of medical intervention and care. Louis Pasteur's work on rabies included cats in his research, helping establish protocols for managing disease in domestic animals. The rabies vaccine, first developed in 1885, could protect both cats and the humans they lived with, making cat ownership safer and more socially acceptable. Science was systematically dismantling every rational objection to cats, leaving only the irrational superstitions to wither away through generational change. American attitudes toward cats evolved differently than European ones, shaped by frontier pragmatism and later by suburban domesticity. Early American settlers needed cats desperately for pest control in barns and homesteads, and practical necessity overrode most superstitious concerns, except during periodic moral panics like the Salem witch trials. By the 19th century, American cats were divided into clear categories: working barn cats and household pets, with the latter becoming increasingly common as American prosperity grew. The development of American suburbs in the early 20th century created ideal environments for pet cats, with houses large enough to accommodate animals and yards for them to patrol. By the 1950s, the American dream included a cat on the hearth, a complete reversal from Puritan anxieties about feline demonic associations just a few centuries prior. The invention of commercial cat litter in 1947 by Edward Lowe was arguably as important to cats' modern success as any cultural or scientific development. Before cat litter, cats in homes created sanitation problems that limited their appeal as indoor pets. Most cats were indoor-outdoor animals, expected to do their business outside, which exposed them to dangers and limited their integration into human domestic spaces. Lowe's accidental discovery, offering his neighbor clay granules as an alternative to ashes for her cat's box, revolutionized cat ownership. Suddenly, cats could be fully indoor animals, living their entire lives in climate-controlled comfort while their owners managed waste discreetly. This innovation made cats practical for apartment dwellers and urban residents who couldn't provide outdoor access, massively expanding the potential cat-owning demographic. Never underestimate how much human civilization depends on someone solving the poop problem. The rise of cats in popular culture throughout the 20th century cemented their rehabilitation and then elevation to cultural dominance. From Felix the Cat in the 1920s to Garfield in the 1970s, cartoon cats became ubiquitous in entertainment. T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats became the musical Cats in 1981, running for decades and introducing millions to the idea that cats were worthy subjects of serious artistic endeavor, or at least expensive theatrical production. Dr. Seuss's The Cat in the Hat made a mischievous cat into an icon of childhood literacy. Disney's various cat characters, from the Cheshire Cat to the Aristocats, presented felines as charming, sophisticated, and worthy of audience sympathy. By the end of the 20th century, cats had achieved something remarkable. They were simultaneously mundane household pets and cultural icons, ordinary and mythologized at the same time. The internet age transformed cats from popular pets into the dominant species of digital culture, completing their conquest of human civilization. The first cat video was uploaded to the internet in the 1990s, and humanity has been obsessed ever since. Cats possess qualities that make them perfect for viral content. They're photogenic, they do unpredictable things, they have expressive faces, and they don't require human language to be entertaining. I Can Ask Cheeseburger launched in 2007, creating the lolcat phenomenon and establishing cats as the internet's unofficial mascot. YouTube's most viewed videos include numerous cat clips. Instagram influencer cats have millions of followers and lucrative sponsorship deals. Grumpy Cat, who died in 2019, had an estimated net worth of $100 million. Let that sink in. A cat with a permanent frown made more money than most humans will see in 1,000 lifetimes, roughly 800 years after Pope Gregory IX declared cats to be demonic. The scientific study of cat behavior and cognition in recent decades has revealed just how wrong the medieval church was about feline nature. Research shows that cats domesticated themselves through a mutually beneficial relationship with humans, that they form genuine emotional bonds with their owners, and that they possess sophisticated social intelligence adapted to their ecological niche as solitary hunters. Studies on cat vocalizations reveal that cats developed meowing specifically to communicate with humans, essentially learning our language to manipulate us into feeding them, which is actually brilliant, not demonic. Brain scans show that cats experience emotions similar to humans, including affection, fear, and pleasure. The scientific consensus is clear. Cats are remarkable animals perfectly adapted to coexist with humans, and attributing supernatural qualities to them says more about human psychology than feline nature. The contemporary cat ownership boom has created its own set of ecological and ethical challenges that medieval cat killers could never have imagined. Domestic cats in developed countries now number in the hundreds of millions, and outdoor cats have become significant predators of wild birds and small mammals. In the United States alone, outdoor domestic cats kill billions of birds annually, raising serious conservation concerns. Australia has declared feral cats an invasive species threatening native wildlife and has implemented controversial culling programs. The irony is almost painful. We went from killing cats because we thought they were evil to killing cats because they're too effective at being cats. The solution, according to conservationists and veterinarians, is keeping pet cats indoors, essentially granting them the pampered indoor lives that medieval peasants would have considered absurdly luxurious while protecting the ecosystems our ancestors inadvertently damaged by persecuting felines in the first place. The modern pet industry's treatment of cats has created new forms of exploitation that would seem bizarre to medieval observers, but are perfectly normal now. Cats are bred for extreme features that compromise their health, dressed in costumes for social media likes, fed specialized diets that cost more than many humans spend on food, and subjected to beauty treatments like claw caps and fur dyeing. We've created cats that can't breathe properly, cats that can't reproduce naturally, and cats that require constant medical intervention to survive. The medieval church accused cats of being unnatural abominations, and through selective breeding, we've actually made some of them into unnatural abominations, just not in the demonic way originally imagined. The modern cat fancy has accomplished what centuries of persecution couldn't. It's created cats that genuinely suffer, not from supernatural evil, but from human vanity and the desire to make living creatures into accessories. The psychology of the internet's cat obsession reveals interesting continuities with historical human-cat relationships. Medieval people projected their fears and superstitions onto cats. Modern people project emotions, thoughts, and personalities onto cats through memes and anthropomorphization. We create elaborate narratives about what cats are thinking, assign them human motivations and emotions, and build entire online communities around shared interpretations of cat behavior. In some ways, we're still doing what our ancestors did, seeing cats as more than just animals, as vessels for human meaning-making. The difference is that where medieval people saw cats as supernatural threats, We see them as sources of comfort, humor, and emotional connection. Both perspectives reveal more about human needs than feline reality, but at least the modern version doesn't involve burning anyone alive, so that's progress. The economics of contemporary cat ownership would astound medieval observers who couldn't understand why anyone would voluntarily feed an animal associated with the devil. The global pet cat industry is worth tens of billions of dollars annually, including food, litter, toys, medical care, boarding, grooming, and insurance. People take out pet insurance policies for cats, spend thousands on veterinary procedures, and leave estates to their feline companions. The average lifetime cost of owning a cat in a developed country can exceed $10,000 to $20,000, money that medieval peasants would have considered literally insane to spend on an animal. Yet modern cat owners consider this normal, even modest compared to what they'd spend on other pets. Cats have gone from being free pest control to being luxury items, from economic assets to economic dependence, from outdoor workers to indoor royalty who have humans trained to clean their waste and serve them meals on demand. The globalization of cat culture in the 21st century has created fascinating paradoxes and regional variations that reflect ongoing tensions between tradition and modernity. In parts of the Middle East and Asia, where cats have historically been respected, Western-style cat fancy has introduced new breeds and ownership practices that sometimes clash with traditional approaches. Meanwhile, in regions where cat populations were never systematically persecuted, the Western obsession with indoor cats and expensive veterinary care can seem bizarre or excessive. Japan's cat cafes, where customers pay to spend time with cats while drinking coffee, represent a uniquely modern phenomenon that would be incomprehensible to both medieval Europeans burning cats and medieval Japanese who simply coexisted with them. We've created an entire economy around temporary access to cat companionship, monetizing what used to be a free relationship between humans and semi-domesticated animals. The persistence of anti-cat superstitions in supposedly rational modern societies demonstrates how deeply medieval paranoia embedded itself in Western culture. Black cats are still considered unlucky in many Western countries, affecting their adoption rates from shelters. Black cats statistically spend longer in shelters and are euthanized at higher rates than cats of other colors. This is a direct legacy of Pope Gregory IX 1233 declaration, still killing cats nearly 800 years later, just more slowly and bureaucratically. In the United States, some shelters won't adopt out black cats around Halloween, fearing they'll be used in satanic rituals, a concern that reflects lingering medieval anxieties despite having virtually no basis in reality. Modern Satanists, for the record, are generally cat lovers who would be horrified by animal abuse. The church created a superstition so durable that it survives in secular societies that have largely abandoned the religious framework that birthed it. The COVID-19 pandemic created an unexpected boom in cat adoption, with shelters across the developed world reporting record numbers of cats being taken into homes as people sought companionship during lockdowns. The parallel to the Black Death is worth noting. During the original plague, cats were blamed and killed. During this one, cats were adopted and cherished. This represents either enormous moral progress or an impressive failure to learn from history, depending on your perspective. The pandemic revealed how thoroughly cats have been integrated into modern emotional life. They're not pest control anymore, but sources of psychological comfort, social media content, and companionship. People who would never need a cat to protect grain stores from rats desperately needed cats to protect their mental health from isolation. Somewhere, Pope Gregory IX is spinning in his grave while medieval rats laugh from hell. The contemporary animal welfare movement's focus on cats has created ethical frameworks that would seem alien to both medieval cat killers and medieval cat keepers. Modern animal welfare advocates argue that cats have rights, that they deserve legal protection from cruelty, and that humans have obligations to prevent cat suffering. Trap-neuter-return programs for feral cats reflect the belief that even unsocialized cats deserve humane treatment rather than extermination. This represents a radical departure from both medieval persecution and medieval pragmatism. We've moved beyond cats are useful or cats are evil to cats have inherent value as sentient beings deserving of moral consideration. The philosophical journey from burn them as demons to they deserve rights and dignity took about 800 years, which is either impressively fast or depressingly slow, depending on your expectations for human moral development. The tension between cat welfare and wildlife conservation has created genuinely difficult ethical dilemmas that resist easy resolution. Should outdoor cats be banned to protect birds, even if it compromises cat welfare and owner preferences? Should feral cat colonies be eliminated to protect native species or managed humanely even if they continue causing ecological damage? These questions force modern societies to balance competing values: animal welfare, ecological preservation, human preferences, and practical feasibility, in ways that expose the limitations of both utilitarian and rights-based ethical frameworks. Medieval people killed cats based on superstition. Modern conservationists sometimes kill cats based on science. Both can justify their actions through their respective worldviews, but the cats end up dead either way. Progress is messy and complicated, and sometimes the right answer isn't obvious even when you're not operating from medieval superstition. The medicalization of cat care in wealthy countries has reached levels that would seem absurd to any pre-modern society, including beneficial absurdity. Cats receive dental care, psychotropic medications for anxiety, chemotherapy for cancer, kidney transplants, and physical therapy. The veterinary standard of care for cats now rivals human medicine in many respects, with specialists, advanced imaging, and complex surgeries available for owners willing to pay. This represents either the pinnacle of human compassion toward animals or a symptom of late-stage capitalism's ability to commodify every relationship, or both simultaneously. A medieval peasant told that 21st century humans spend thousands treating cat cancer would assume you were describing a fantasy world of impossible wealth. They'd be partially right. This level of care is only accessible in wealthy countries and to affluent individuals, creating healthcare disparities among cats that mirror healthcare disparities among humans. The use of cats in scientific research presents another uncomfortable modern parallel to historical cat persecution. While we've stopped burning cats as witches, we've found new ways to make them suffer in the name of human priorities. Cats have been used in neurological research, toxicity testing, and other experimental contexts that cause pain and death. The practice has decreased significantly due to animal welfare regulations and the development of alternative research methods, but it continues. The justification has shifted from theological to scientific. We no longer hurt cats because they're demonic, but because their suffering might produce knowledge that benefits humans. It's a more rational justification than medieval superstition, but from the cat's perspective, the distinction probably doesn't matter much. Suffering is suffering, whether inflicted by religious zealots or laboratory researchers, and the fact that we've constructed elaborate ethical frameworks to justify it doesn't change the experience of the animals involved. The cultural phenomenon of cat people versus dog people reveals interesting continuities with historical attitudes toward independence and authority. Cat people are often stereotyped as introverted, independent, and nonconformist. Exactly the traits that made cat ownership suspicious during the medieval and early modern periods. Dog people are stereotyped as social, loyal, and conventional, the traits valued by authoritarian religious and political structures. These stereotypes are mostly nonsense, but they reflect deep cultural associations between animals and human personality types. The medieval church's preference for dogs over cats wasn't arbitrary. Dogs represent obedience and loyalty to authority, while cats represent independence and self-direction. The fact that modern cat lovers embrace their pets' independence as a positive trait represents a genuine shift in values from medieval society, where independence was threatening and obedience was virtue. We've gone from burning cats for being independent to celebrating them for it. The environmental impact of cat ownership in the modern era creates bizarre contradictions that highlight the gap between our values and practices. Cat owners, who presumably love animals, contribute to an industry that produces enormous environmental waste through litter, packaging, and meat-based pet food, requiring industrial animal agriculture. The carbon footprint of feeding cats in developed countries is substantial. Millions of cows, chickens, and fish are raised and killed annually to feed domestic cats, creating greenhouse gas emissions and ecological damage. Cat litter, much of it clay-based, requires mining operations that scar landscapes. The pet industry's environmental cost is rarely discussed because it forces uncomfortable recognition that our love for cats contributes to systems that harm other animals and ecosystems. Medieval people killed cats and suffered plagues. Modern people pamper cats and contribute to climate change. Both approaches have unintended consequences, just on different scales and timelines. The philosophy of animal consciousness and rights has evolved dramatically since the medieval period, with cats serving as interesting test cases for moral consideration. Peter Singer's animal liberation philosophy and Tom Reagan's animal rights theory both grant cats moral status based on their capacity to suffer and their subjective experience of life. This represents a radical departure from medieval Christian anthropocentrism, which viewed animals as created for human use with no independent moral value. Yet even modern secular animal ethics struggles with questions medieval people never considered. Do cats have a right to outdoor access, even if it harms wildlife? Do feral cats deserve food and medical care, even if they're not owned? Can cats consent to being pets, or is all domestication a form of exploitation? These questions emerge from taking animal welfare seriously in ways our ancestors never did, but they also reveal tensions between different ethical values that resist easy resolution. The aestheticization of cats through social media has created a new form of relationship between humans and felines that's simultaneously more intimate and more shallow than historical precedents. We document our cats' lives obsessively, sharing photos and videos that capture moments of cuteness, humor, or relatability. This creates genuine affection and connection, but it also reduces cats to content generators, valued for their ability to produce likable posts rather than for their own sake. Medieval people projected supernatural qualities onto cats. Modern people project personalities and emotions onto cats to make them more marketable online. Both approaches involve anthropomorphization and projection, but the modern version is commercialized and distributed globally. Your cat isn't just your companion. It's a potential influencer, a content creator, a brand. We've turned cats into workers again, just in a very different economy than the medieval grain storage they once patrolled. The legal status of cats in contemporary society reflects ongoing confusion about whether they're property, family members, or something in between. Laws vary wildly between jurisdictions regarding cat ownership responsibilities, liability for damage caused by cats, and protections for cats from abuse. Some places treat cats as pure property with minimal protections. Others recognize them in custody disputes like children. Courts have awarded damages for emotional distress from cat deaths, recognizing that cats aren't just fungible property, but unique individuals with relationships. This legal evolution represents progress from medieval frameworks that couldn't decide if cats were property, pests, or demons. But it also creates inconsistencies. Cats can be family members worthy of custody arrangements while simultaneously being killed by conservation programs as invasive species. The legal system, like the society it reflects, hasn't fully resolved what cats are or what we owe them. The therapeutic use of cats in modern healthcare settings represents a dramatic reversal from medieval associations between cats and disease. Animal-assisted therapy programs now bring cats into hospitals, nursing homes, psychiatric facilities, and rehabilitation centers based on evidence that interaction with cats reduces stress, lowers blood pressure, and improves mental health outcomes. The same creatures that were once blamed for spreading plague are now prescribed as medicine, which is either poetic justice or cosmic irony, depending on your perspective. Therapy cats visit cancer patients, comfort dementia sufferers, and help children with autism develop social skills. Medieval physicians used leeches and prayer. Modern medicine uses cats and antidepressants. One of these approaches is significantly more pleasant, though both reflect their era's understanding of health and healing. The development of cat genetics and genomics has revealed the actual history of cat domestication, definitively disproving medieval supernatural theories while raising new questions about human-animal relationships. DNA analysis shows that cats domesticated themselves approximately 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent, choosing to associate with humans for mutual benefit rather than being forcibly tamed. Genetic studies reveal that domestic cats are only semi-domesticated compared to dogs, retaining more wild behavioral traits and genetic similarity to their wildcat ancestors. This scientific understanding vindicates what cat owners have always known. Cats aren't really domesticated in the traditional sense. They're wild animals who've decided to tolerate us in exchange for food and shelter. The medieval church feared cats' independence and inscrutability. Modern science confirms these traits are genuine features of feline biology, not demonic influence. The phenomenon of cat hoarding presents a modern pathology with deep roots in historical human-cat relationships. Individuals who accumulate dozens or hundreds of cats in unsanitary conditions, causing suffering to the animals and themselves, represent a disturbed relationship to feline companionship that nonetheless reflects broader cultural attitudes. Medieval witch accusations often involved women with multiple cats. Modern animal welfare interventions often involve women with multiple cats. The demographics are similar, but the interpretation has shifted from moral condemnation to mental health concern. Cat hoarding is now understood as a psychological disorder, often linked to attachment issues, trauma, or obsessive-compulsive tendencies. We've medicalized what medieval society demonized, which is progress, but we still haven't fully addressed why the pathological accumulation of cats specifically triggers such strong social responses, while hoarding other objects or animals generates less cultural anxiety. The cat cafe phenomenon, originating in Taiwan in 1998 and spreading globally through Japan and beyond, represents the ultimate commodification of human-cat interaction. Customers pay hourly fees to spend time with cats in curated environments, essentially renting companionship without the responsibilities of ownership. This business model would be incomprehensible to medieval people who either killed cats or lived with them as working animals. The idea of paying to temporarily be near cats while drinking coffee and taking selfies would seem like an elaborate joke about decadent modernity. Yet cat cafes serve genuine social needs in urban societies where pet ownership is difficult. They provide stress relief, social spaces for introverts, and access to animals for people in no-pet housing. They also raise ethical questions about cat welfare when animals are essentially working full-time entertaining strangers, though regulations vary widely between jurisdictions. The controversy over breed standards in cat fancy demonstrates how human aesthetic preferences can harm animal welfare, repeating historical patterns of exploitation in new forms. Breeders have created cats with progressively flatter faces, causing breathing difficulties and dental problems. Scottish fold cats have a genetic mutation affecting cartilage that causes their distinctive folded ears, but also causes painful arthritis throughout their bodies. Munchkin cats are bred for dwarfism, creating mobility issues. The Cat Fanciers Association and similar organizations maintain breed standards that essentially codify suffering as desirable traits, valuing appearance over health. Medieval people tortured cats out of superstitious fear. Modern breeders torture cats through selective breeding for aesthetic preferences. Both reflect human capacity to prioritize our own desires over animal welfare, just with different justifications and varying degrees of intentionality. The rise of veganism and animal rights activism has created interesting tensions within the pet-owning community, particularly for cat owners. Cats are obligate carnivores requiring animal protein to survive, making vegan cat ownership ethically problematic for people who oppose animal agriculture. Some activists attempt to feed cats vegan diets supplemented with synthetic nutrients, despite veterinary warnings that this compromises feline health. Others refuse to keep cats, because feeding them requires participating in the meat industry they oppose. Still, others accept this as a moral compromise, acknowledging that loving cats means contributing to systems they find morally objectionable. Medieval people faced no such contradictions. They were fine with killing animals and couldn't imagine ethical objections to eating meat. Modern ethical frameworks create genuine dilemmas our ancestors never encountered, forcing people to navigate competing values without clear resolution. The cultural variations in contemporary cat treatment highlight how much national and regional attitudes still differ despite globalization. In some East Asian countries, eating cat meat remains culturally acceptable, horrifying Western cat lovers who view cats as companions rather than food. In Australia, feral cats are killed as invasive species threatening native wildlife, while American TNR advocates argue for managing feral populations humanely. Middle Eastern countries largely maintain traditional tolerant attitudes toward street cats, while Western countries increasingly criminalize allowing cats outdoors. Islamic traditions' respect for cats continues to influence treatment in Muslim-majority countries, contrasting with historically Christian regions where medieval anti-cat sentiment left lasting cultural scars. These variations demonstrate that there's no universal human-cat relationship, only culturally specific arrangements reflecting different histories, environments, and value systems. The medieval church's war on cats was distinctly European, and its aftermath continues shaping attitudes in ways other cultures never experienced. The field of animal cognition research focused on cats has exploded in recent decades, revealing sophisticated mental abilities while also highlighting how much we still don't understand about feline consciousness. Studies show that cats recognize their names, understand pointing gestures from humans, can count small quantities, and possess object permanence. Research on cat social cognition reveals that cats distinguish between familiar and unfamiliar humans and adjust their behavior based on human emotional cues. However, cats perform poorly on tests designed for dogs, leading to ongoing debate about whether cats are less intelligent or simply less motivated to perform for researchers, a distinction that matters significantly for interpreting results. Medieval people thought cats were supernaturally intelligent servants of Satan. Modern science suggests they're naturally intelligent, but fundamentally uninterested in proving it to humans, which is honestly very on-brand for cats. The economics of stray and feral cat management in contemporary cities consumes substantial public resources, creating ongoing political debates about appropriate policy responses. Cities spend millions annually on animal control, shelter operations, TNR programs, and wildlife protection efforts related to cat populations. These expenditures reflect competing interests. Animal welfare advocates want humane treatment for cats. Conservationists want wildlife protection. Residents want nuisance reduction, and everyone wants cost-effective solutions. The resulting policies often satisfy nobody while costing everybody. Medieval cities faced similar cat-related resource allocation decisions, but resolved them through periodic cat massacres, which was morally horrific but administratively simple. Modern democratic societies must navigate stakeholder conflicts through bureaucratic processes, public consultations, and compromise solutions that are more ethical but vastly more complicated. Progress means accepting that doing the right thing is often expensive and contentious. The mimetic evolution of cat content online demonstrates how digital culture has elevated cats to a status transcending their role as pets or even animals, transforming them into symbols and linguistic units. Cat, as a concept online, refers not just to actual felines, but to a constellation of meanings: cuteness, relatability, chaos, independence, humor. Cat images and videos function as a universal language, crossing linguistic and cultural barriers, conveying emotions and ideas efficiently. This semiotic transformation of cats from animals to signs represents something unprecedented in human-cat relations. Medieval people used cats symbolically too, but those symbols were relatively stable and culturally specific. Digital cat culture is fluid, participatory, and globally distributed. We've moved from cats as supernatural entities to cats as hyperreal simulacra, representations that exist independently of actual cats. You can engage with cat culture online without ever interacting with a real cat, which would have seemed like actual witchcraft to medieval observers. The intersection of cat ownership and public health took an unexpected turn with toxoplasmosis research suggesting that cat-transmitted parasites might influence human behavior and mental health. Toxoplasma gondii, spread through cat feces, infects an estimated 30 to 50% of humans globally and has been linked to increased risk-taking, schizophrenia, and other behavioral changes, though causation remains debated. The irony is extraordinary. Medieval people feared cats would possess them or transmit demonic influence. And modern science has discovered that cats actually do transmit parasites that alter human brain function, just through biology rather than supernatural means. The medieval church was accidentally correct that cats could change human behavior, but completely wrong about the mechanism and solution. The appropriate response isn't persecution, but basic hygiene and proper litter box management, which medieval people couldn't have known, but which we have no excuse for ignoring. The financial industry's treatment of cats as valuable assets represents the apotheosis of their journey from persecuted vermin to economic commodities. Prize-winning show cats sell for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. Celebrity cats generate substantial income through merchandise, endorsements, and appearance fees. The estate planning industry now offers specialized trusts for cats, ensuring they're financially provided for after their owners' deaths. Insurance companies offer policies covering veterinary expenses, liability, and even death benefits for cats. Medieval people who valued cats economically did so because they killed rats. Modern people value cats economically for their aesthetic qualities, entertainment value, and emotional significance. We've moved from cats having use value to cats having exchange value and even speculative investment value. Late capitalism found a way to financialize literally everything, including the creatures medieval capitalism helped persecute. The anthropological study of human-cat relationships across cultures reveals that the Western trajectory from persecution to obsession is historically unusual, not universal. Indigenous cultures in the Americas had no cats before European contact and developed different relationships with them post-colonization, often incorporating cats into existing frameworks for understanding animals rather than adopting European baggage. African cultures where wild cats originated maintained different traditions than either Islamic or Christian societies. Pacific Island nations experience cats as introduced species with ecological impacts, but without the supernatural associations Europeans brought. This comparative perspective highlights that the medieval church's war on cats and modernity's compensatory cat worship are both culturally specific phenomena rooted in European religious history. The rest of humanity managed to relate to cats without either burning them or making them Instagram influencers, suggesting that maybe Western culture has consistently been weird about cats regardless of whether we're persecuting them or pampering them. The philosophy of pet ownership itself has evolved dramatically since the medieval period, with cats serving as interesting case studies for whether keeping animals as companions is ethical. Ancient and medieval people kept cats for functional reasons. Pest control, which provided clear mutual benefit. Modern pet keeping is primarily about human emotional needs, raising questions about whether we're justified in confining animals for our own satisfaction. Some philosophers argue that domestic cats benefit from the arrangement, receiving food, shelter, and medical care they wouldn't have in the wild. Others contend that domestication itself is a form of exploitation, that we've created dependent animals and then claimed credit for meeting needs we created. Medieval people never wrestled with these questions because they saw animals as resources rather than moral subjects. Modern ethical frameworks force us to justify relationships our ancestors took for granted, which is either moral progress or overthinking depending on your philosophical commitments. The impact of climate change on cat populations and cat-human relationships represents an emerging challenge that connects historical ecology with contemporary crisis. Rising temperatures are expanding the ranges of cat-borne diseases, like toxoplasmosis and rabies into previously unaffected regions. Extreme weather events threaten both owned and feral cat populations, creating welfare concerns and resource allocation challenges. Climate-driven habitat loss forces wild felids in a conflict with humans, while domestic cats face heat stress and changing parasite dynamics. The interconnection between cat welfare and environmental sustainability becomes increasingly obvious. The industrial systems that enable modern cat pampering contribute to climate change that threatens all species, cats included. Medieval cat killers contributed to plague deaths. Modern cat lovers contribute to climate catastrophe. Neither group intended harm, but intentions don't determine outcomes, and the unintended consequences of human-cat relationships continue accumulating across centuries. The neuroscience of human-cat bonding reveals the biological mechanisms underlying our contemporary obsession with cats, explaining why cat videos are genuinely addictive rather than merely popular. Research shows that interacting with cats triggers oxytocin release in humans, the same hormone involved in parent-infant bonding and romantic attachment. Viewing cat images activates reward centers in the brain, providing genuine pleasure that reinforces engagement. This neurobiological response explains why cat content proliferates online. It's not just culturally popular, but biochemically rewarding. Medieval people formed attachments to cats too, but they lacked the technological infrastructure to weaponize cuteness for global distribution. The internet combined biological vulnerability to cat cuteness with algorithmic amplification, creating a feedback loop that makes cat content nearly inescapable. We're being manipulated by our own brain chemistry and feline photogenicity, which is honestly a more insidious form of control than any demonic possession the medieval church imagined. The debate over outdoor versus indoor cats has become increasingly polarized, reflecting broader tensions between individual freedom and collective responsibility. Indoor-only advocates cite evidence that indoor cats live longer, healthier lives and don't harm wildlife. Outdoor access advocates argue that cats have welfare interests in expressing natural behaviors and that confinement causes suffering. The debate divides along philosophical lines about autonomy, harm prevention, and whose interests should be prioritized. Medieval cats were almost entirely outdoor animals by default. Modern cats in developed countries are increasingly indoor prisoners or indoor privileged residents, depending on perspective. Neither arrangement is natural in any meaningful sense. Both reflect human choices about how to manage our relationship with cats. The argument parallels other contemporary debates about freedom versus safety, individual rights versus collective welfare, suggesting that our relationship with cats increasingly serves as a proxy for broader disagreements about values and social organization. The representation of cats in contemporary art and literature has shifted from symbolic to psychological, with cats serving as mirrors for human anxiety, alienation, and desire for connection. Modern writers use cats to explore themes of independence, domesticity, and the tensions between wildness and civilization. Contemporary artists create work interrogating the power dynamics of pet ownership, the commodification of cuteness, and the environmental costs of modern animal love. This represents a dramatic shift from medieval literature, where cats appeared as straightforward symbols of evil or, occasionally, trickster cunning. Modern creative works acknowledge cats as complex beings while simultaneously using them to explore human concerns, creating a double consciousness that medieval allegory never attempted. We project onto cats while simultaneously trying to see them as themselves, creating productive tension between anthropomorphism and respect for animal alterity. It's philosophically sophisticated in ways medieval cat representation never was, though whether the cats care about our representational sophistication is highly doubtful. The biotechnology industry's interest in cats has opened new frontiers in genetic engineering with profound ethical implications. Scientists have cloned cats, created glow-in-the-dark cats by inserting jellyfish genes, and developed genetically modified cats that don't trigger human allergies. These interventions represent unprecedented levels of human control over feline biology, manipulating cats at the molecular level to serve human preferences and overcome natural limitations. Medieval people feared cats as supernatural beings beyond human control. Modern biotechnology makes cats into entirely controllable artifacts, designed and manufactured to specification. Both approaches deny cats their own nature and autonomy, just through opposite mechanisms. Medieval superstition saw cats as too powerful and threatening, while modern genetic engineering sees them as insufficiently optimized for human purposes. Neither perspective fully respects cats as they actually are, though at least modern genetic engineering doesn't involve public immolation. The role of cats in pandemic preparedness and public health policy remains surprisingly relevant despite centuries separating us from the Black Death. Rodent-borne diseases continue threatening human populations globally, with outbreaks of plague, leptospirosis, and hantavirus occurring regularly in various regions. Cats still serve pest control functions in some agricultural and urban contexts, providing low-cost, sustainable rodent management without chemical pesticides. Public health authorities increasingly recognize that feral cat colonies can provide this service when properly managed through TNR programs. This represents a quiet vindication of the practical value medieval people recognized before religious hysteria overrode common sense. The difference is that modern approaches are informed by ecology, epidemiology, and animal welfare rather than superstition and theology. We've finally returned to valuing cats for their actual contributions to human well-being. It just took several hundred years and millions of unnecessary deaths to get there. The paradox of cat domestication, that cats domesticated themselves and remain only partially tamed, raises profound questions about agency and consent in human-animal relationships. Unlike dogs, livestock, or most other domestic animals, cats entered human society voluntarily and retain the ability to return to feral existence. This unique status makes cats useful for thinking about what genuine interspecies partnership might look like. Not complete human control, but mutual accommodation of interests. Medieval cat persecution represented an attempt to dominate or eliminate cats when they couldn't be controlled. Modern indoor-only cat keeping represents another form of domination through confinement. Perhaps the healthiest human-cat relationship lies somewhere between these extremes, acknowledging cats' partial wildness while providing care, allowing independence while maintaining connection. Of course, cats themselves have little say in these philosophical discussions, which rather undermines claims that we're engaged in genuine partnership rather than elaborate rationalization of dominance relationships. The future of human-cat relationships faces multiple uncertainties shaped by technological change, environmental crisis, and evolving ethical consciousness. Climate change may disrupt established ecosystems, forcing adaptations in how humans and cats coexist. Biotechnology could create designer cats optimized for human preferences, raising questions about how far genetic manipulation should go. Artificial intelligence and robotics might produce synthetic cats, providing companionship without the ecological costs or ethical complications of living animals. Virtual and augmented reality could enable cat ownership experiences without actual cats, satisfying human desires while eliminating animal welfare concerns. These possibilities range from hopeful to dystopian, but all represent continuations of humanity's tendency to reshape our relationship with cats according to our needs and values. Medieval people tried to eliminate cats physically. Modern people might eliminate them conceptually by replacing them with simulacra. Either way, actual cats risk becoming collateral damage in human projects that were never really about them at all. The legal and policy landscape for cat management continues evolving as societies attempt to balance competing interests with limited resources and imperfect information. Some jurisdictions have implemented mandatory cat registration and licensing systems similar to dogs. Others have banned outdoor cats entirely to protect wildlife. Still others provide public funding for TNR programs or free spay-neuter services. Each approach reflects different prioritizations of animal welfare, environmental conservation, public health, and individual freedom. None has proven fully satisfactory, and debates continue about optimal policy. Medieval authorities solved cat problems through periodic massacres sanctioned by religious ideology. Modern democratic societies must navigate pluralistic values through messy political processes that rarely produce elegant solutions. The contemporary situation is frustrating and expensive, but represents moral progress from systematic persecution. Sometimes the measure of civilizational advancement is replacing simple, terrible solutions with complicated, imperfect ones. And if that's the standard, we're definitely advancing. The memorialization of cats in contemporary culture demonstrates their elevation from disposable working animals to beloved family members deserving of grief and remembrance. Pet cemeteries and cremation services for cats have become normalized in developed countries, with elaborate headstones, memorial jewelry, and commemorative services available. Social media provides platforms for public mourning of deceased cats, with online communities offering support and validation for pet grief. This represents a dramatic shift from medieval attitudes where cat death was either celebrated if the cat was suspected of being demonic, or unremarked if it was a working animal. Modern recognition of pet grief validates emotional bonds between humans and cats, acknowledging that these relationships matter and that loss deserves recognition. It also reflects changing attitudes toward death, emotion, and the boundaries of family. When a cat's death receives more social recognition and support than many human deaths in previous eras, we've clearly entered new territory in terms of how we value non-human life and emotional relationships. The intersection of cats and technology continues accelerating in unexpected directions, creating cyborg relationships between humans, animals, and digital systems that would be incomprehensible to any pre-modern society. GPS tracking collars allow owners to monitor cats' movements in real time, collecting data on their hunting behaviors, territorial ranges, and daily activities. Automated feeders, litter boxes, and cameras enable remote cat care and surveillance. Apps analyze cat vocalizations to interpret emotional states and health issues. Microchipping has become standard practice for identification and recovery. These technologies transform cats from autonomous creatures into nodes in monitoring networks, generating data streams that shape how we understand and manage them. Medieval people feared cats because they moved invisibly at night. Modern technology eliminates that invisibility, making cats perpetually trackable and knowable. We've achieved total surveillance of beings we claim to love, which raises uncomfortable questions about whether constant monitoring is compatible with genuine affection or represents a controlling relationship dressed up as care. The philosophical concept of cat personhood has emerged in some animal rights circles, arguing that cats deserve legal recognition as persons with rights rather than property owned by humans. This represents the logical endpoint of centuries-long evolution from cats as demonic vermin to cats as moral subjects deserving consideration. Proponents argue that cats' sentience, emotional lives, and capacity for suffering warrant legal protections similar to human rights, including rights to bodily autonomy, freedom from exploitation, and legal representation. Critics contend this anthropomorphizes cats inappropriately and creates unworkable legal frameworks. The debate highlights how far we've come from medieval cat burning, but also how uncertain we remain about what we own non-human animals. If cats are persons, is keeping them as pets a form of kidnapping? If they're not persons, what justifies the extraordinary moral consideration we give them compared to rats or other animals? These questions emerge directly from taking seriously the implications of rejecting medieval anthropocentrism without having clear alternatives. The commercialization of cat spirituality represents an amusing full-circle return to medieval associations between cats and supernatural realms, except monetized through wellness culture. Crystal healing practitioners sell cat-specific gemstone arrangements. Energy workers offer animal communication sessions to channel cats' thoughts and feelings. New Age spiritualists describe cats as spiritual guides, psychic protectors, and interdimensional travelers. These beliefs echo medieval superstitions about cats' supernatural nature, but frame them positively rather than negatively. Cats aren't demonic but enlightened, not servants of Satan but spiritual teachers. The theological inversion is complete. What the church condemned as evil, contemporary spirituality celebrates as sacred. Of course, this modern cat mysticism is also a business, with practitioners charging substantial fees for services of dubious efficacy. Medieval cat superstitions killed cats. Modern ones generate revenue. It's hard to say which the cats would find more objectionable if they could understand human nonsense, though at least the modern version doesn't involve fire. The impact of social media algorithms on cat breeding and adoption trends demonstrates how digital systems shape biological outcomes for living creatures. Certain breeds become popular because they photograph well and generate engagement online. Scottish Folds, Munchkins, and other breeds with problematic health issues proliferate because they're visually distinctive and shareable. Algorithms optimize for engagement rather than animal welfare, creating market incentives for breeding cats with extreme features that cause suffering. Simultaneously, less photogenic cats languish in shelters because they don't generate clicks or likes. We've created a system where cats' value and survival chances depend partly on their algorithmic performance, their ability to trigger human engagement metrics. Medieval cats lived or died based on superstitious beliefs about their supernatural nature. Modern cats live or die based on their virality potential. Both systems are fundamentally absurd ways to determine which cats thrive and which don't, but at least the medieval version didn't pretend to be rational. The concept of cat years versus human years reflects ongoing attempts to understand cats' subjective experience of time and aging, part of broader efforts to empathize across species boundaries. The old 1 cat year equals 7 human years formula has been revised through research into feline development and aging, with more sophisticated calculations accounting for rapid early maturation and slower later aging. This seemingly trivial concern actually represents something significant: the attempt to translate between human and feline experiences to imagine what life feels like from a cat's perspective. Medieval people never wondered what aging felt like for cats, because cats weren't subjects with experiences worth considering. Modern people invest research resources into understanding cat aging, partly because we care about their well-being and partly because it helps us provide better care. The effort to see the world from cats' perspective, however imperfect, represents a kind of moral imagination previous eras lacked. Whether cats appreciate our attempts to understand their subjective experience is unknowable, but the attempt itself demonstrates how far we've traveled from medieval denial of animal consciousness. The role of cats in urban ecosystem management presents genuinely novel challenges that neither medieval cat killers nor modern cat lovers anticipated. Cities are complex ecological systems with their own food webs, population dynamics, and evolutionary pressures. Cats occupy ambiguous positions in these urban ecosystems. They're not wild animals, but not fully controlled domestic ones either, existing in liminal spaces between human and natural systems. Feral cat colonies function as urban predators, controlling rodent and bird populations, but also competing with native predators and spreading to adjacent natural areas. Urban ecologists struggle to model these systems because cats don't fit traditional categories. They're subsidized predators, fed by humans, but hunting independently. Their populations maintained by human intervention, but their behavior somewhat wild. Medieval cities had cats, but lacked the ecological knowledge to understand their systemic impacts. Modern cities have the knowledge, but lack the political will to implement policies that might meaningfully address problems. Understanding doesn't automatically generate solutions, especially when those solutions require confronting beloved pets' negative impacts. The international trade in cats and cat products has created global supply chains with significant economic and ethical implications. Pedigreed cats are shipped internationally for breeding programs. creating genetic diversity concerns and animal welfare issues related to transport stress. Cat food production requires global agricultural systems producing meat, fish, and grain specifically for feline consumption, with associated environmental impacts. Cat litter made from clay, corn, or other materials involves extractive industries and international shipping. The global cat economy employs millions of people in manufacturing, retail, veterinary care, breeding, and services. This represents a massive economic infrastructure built around meeting cats' needs and human desires for cat companionship. Medieval cats were economically significant as pest control, but required minimal human investment. They essentially worked for room and board. Modern cats are economically significant as consumers, driving demand that shapes global markets and resource allocation. We've transformed cats from producers providing pest control services to consumers requiring constant inputs of resources, which is either progress or regression, depending on your perspective. The phenomenon of cat hoarding in digital spaces, accumulating vast collections of cat images, videos, and memes, represents a curious parallel to physical cat hoarding, but with different psychological and social implications. People curate massive folders of cat content, follow hundreds of cat accounts, and spend hours daily consuming cat media. This behavior provides emotional regulation, stress relief, and social connection through shared appreciation of cat content. Unlike physical cat hoarding, digital cat hoarding doesn't harm actual animals and might even reduce demand for physical cat ownership by satisfying emotional needs virtually. However, it also represents a form of mediated relationship with cats that's fundamentally different from living with them. You can love cat content without ever dealing with litter boxes, veterinary bills, or actual feline independence. Medieval people who loved cats had to accept them as they were. Modern people can curate idealized, edited versions that show only the appealing moments. We've created the possibility of loving an idea of cats that may have limited connection to actual feline reality. The ethics of cat euthanasia in shelters remains one of the most controversial aspects of contemporary cat management, forcing societies to confront limits of compassion and resource allocation. Millions of cats are euthanized annually in shelters worldwide because there aren't enough homes for them and resources for indefinite care don't exist. No-kill advocates argue that euthanizing healthy, adoptable cats is morally unacceptable and that more aggressive adoption, fostering, and TNR programs can eliminate the need for shelter killing. Traditional shelter operators counter that resources are finite, that warehousing animals indefinitely can reduce quality of life, and that euthanasia, while tragic, is sometimes the most humane option available. This debate has no easy answers and forces confrontation with uncomfortable realities about human-created cat overpopulation and our limited commitment to solving problems we've caused. Medieval people killed cats from superstition and fear. Modern people kill cats from failure to prevent overpopulation and lack of resources for care. The modern motivation is less evil, but the result is still dead cats. And whether the moral distinction matters depends on your ethical framework. The concept of cat consent has emerged in progressive animal welfare circles, arguing that humans should respect cats' autonomy and bodily boundaries, even in affectionate interactions. This framework suggests waiting for cats to initiate contact, respecting their signals of discomfort or desire for space, and avoiding forcing interaction even with own cats. The approach recognizes cats as subjects with preferences who deserve agency in their relationships with humans. Critics dismiss this as anthropomorphic nonsense, but proponents argue it's simply extending basic respect to sentient beings. The medieval church certainly never considered cat consent. Cats were either tolerated for utility or killed for superstitious reasons, but their preferences were irrelevant. Modern consent frameworks represent genuine progress in recognizing animal autonomy, though they also create potential absurdities when taken to extremes. If cats can't consent to being pets, what does that mean for pet ownership? These questions don't have obvious answers, but asking them represents moral seriousness about human obligations to animals that's historically unprecedented. The future role of cats in human society faces fundamental questions as technology and environmental change accelerate. Will cats remain primarily companions, or will new roles emerge? Could genetically modified cats perform environmental remediation by hunting specific invasive species? Might robotic cats replace living ones as companions, eliminating welfare concerns while satisfying human emotional needs? Will climate change and ecological crisis force reconsideration of supporting large domestic cat populations? These questions lack clear answers, but will shape human-cat relationships in coming decades. Medieval people tried to eliminate cats and cause catastrophe. Modern people pamper cats while potentially causing different catastrophes through environmental degradation and resource consumption. The ideal relationship probably lies between elimination and uncritical celebration, valuing cats while honestly confronting the costs and challenges of coexistence. Whether humanity can achieve that balance remains uncertain, but the alternative is continuing oscillation between persecution and obsession, neither of which serves humans or cats particularly well. The question of what we owe cats and what they owe us remains fundamentally unresolved despite centuries of coexistence. Medieval theology provided clear answers that were completely wrong. Modern science provides more accurate information but fewer moral certainties. We know cats are sentient beings with complex emotional lives and subjective experiences, but translating that knowledge into obligations requires philosophical work science alone can't provide. Do we owe cats freedom even if it harms them and wildlife? Do we owe them care even when it's resource intensive? Do they owe us anything in return for the food, shelter, and medical care we provide? These aren't purely academic questions. They shape policy decisions affecting millions of cats and the ecosystems they inhabit. The medieval answer was that cats owed humans avoidance and humans owed cats persecution because demonic. The modern answer is complicated, contested, and evolving. Maybe that uncertainty is actually progress, a sign that we're taking seriously the genuine difficulty of cross-species ethics rather than imposing simple but wrong answers. The transformation of cats from working animals to emotional support providers reflects broader shifts in how modern humans relate to labor, companionship, and mental health. Medieval cats earned their keep by killing rodents, providing tangible, measurable value to households and communities. Contemporary cats in developed countries rarely perform pest control functions. Instead, they provide emotional labor, reducing stress, alleviating loneliness, and offering non-judgmental companionship. This shift mirrors the transition from industrial to service economies, from valuing productivity to valuing emotional well-being. The recognition that cats provide psychological benefits legitimizes their resource consumption in ways medieval pragmatism couldn't accommodate. However, it also instrumentalizes cats in new ways, valuing them for their therapeutic effects rather than their inherent worth. We've traded one form of exploitation, cats as pest control, for another, cats as unpaid therapists. At least modern cats get climate-controlled housing and premium food as compensation, though whether that constitutes fair exchange depends on whether you can meaningfully consent when you're a cat. The documentary photography and videography of cats has created an unprecedented historical record of feline behavior, diversity, and human-cat relationships. Billions of cat images and videos exist online, documenting everything from sleeping positions to hunting techniques to interspecies friendships. This archive is simultaneously valuable for scientific research and completely ridiculous as a cultural phenomenon. Future historians and anthropologists will have more documentation of 21st century cats than of most human populations throughout history, which says something profound about contemporary priorities and technologies. Medieval cats left almost no record beyond occasional manuscript marginalia and superstitious texts. Modern cats are the most documented animals in history after humans. This obsessive documentation reflects both genuine affection and a peculiarly modern compulsion to capture and share every moment, transforming lived experience into content. Medieval people experience cats directly. Modern people increasingly experience cats mediately through screens, creating a strange situation where we know more about cats collectively while potentially understanding them less individually. The rehabilitation of black cats specifically demonstrates how long cultural superstitions persist even after their theological foundations collapse. Black Cat Appreciation Day, established in 2011, explicitly addresses lingering discrimination against black cats stemming from medieval witch associations. Adoption campaigns emphasize that black cats are no different from other cats except for melanin production, a fact that should be obvious but apparently requires repeated public education. The need for such campaigns 800 years after Pope Gregory IX's declarations reveals how deeply medieval paranoia embedded itself in Western culture. Black cats still face discrimination in supposedly rational modern societies. Their adoption rates lower and shelter stays longer purely because of fur color associated with debunked superstitions. This is both absurd and tragic. We've achieved technological marvels like smartphones and space travel while remaining influenced by 13th century papal bulls about cat fur color. Some medieval legacies die harder than others, and apparently thinking black cats are unlucky is immortal. The rise of cat behaviorism as a profession reflects both increased willingness to invest in cat well-being and recognition that living with cats successfully requires understanding their psychology. Cat behaviorists address problems like aggression, inappropriate elimination, and anxiety using principles from animal behavior science and learning theory. This professionalization of cat care represents a dramatic elevation of feline welfare concerns. Problems that medieval people would have solved by abandoning or killing the cat now warrant hiring specialists and implementing behavioral modification programs. The existence of cat behaviorists acknowledges that cats have complex psychological needs and that humans have obligations to meet those needs. It also reflects affluent society's willingness to spend money on pet problems, creating entire industries around animal well-being. Medieval cats had to adapt to human environments or die. Modern cats get professional consultants to help humans adapt to feline needs. The power dynamic hasn't entirely reversed, but it's shifted considerably. The phenomenon of cats as social media influencers has created a new category of celebrity where non-human animals have larger platforms and greater cultural influence than most humans. Cats with millions of followers shape consumer behavior through sponsored content, influence design trends, and even impact political discourse when their owners use their platforms for advocacy. This represents an unprecedented situation where cats, or rather, carefully curated representations of cats, function as cultural forces independent of their actual feline nature. The cats themselves presumably have no awareness of their fame or influence, making them perfect influencers in some ways. Authentic because they're incapable of calculated self-presentation, yet completely manufactured because every post is selected and framed by human handlers. Medieval people attributed supernatural power to cats. Modern social media gives cats actual cultural power, though mediated entirely through human infrastructure and interpretation. Both situations involve projecting significance onto cats that has more to do with human needs than feline reality. The debate over cat declawing epitomizes tensions between human convenience and animal welfare in contemporary pet keeping. Declawing, actually amputation of the last bone of each toe, is routine in some countries and illegal in others, reflecting different cultural values about animal suffering and owner rights. Proponents argue it prevents furniture damage and makes cats more adoptable, potentially saving lives by keeping cats in homes. Opponents call it mutilative surgery causing chronic pain and behavioral problems, performed solely for human benefit. The medieval church mutilated cats through burning and torture. Modern veterinary medicine offers sanitized mutilation through surgical amputation. The motivation has shifted from persecution to convenience. which is progress of a sort, but still prioritizes human preferences over animal welfare. The fact that this remains controversial rather than universally condemned suggests that even modern animal welfare commitments have limits when they conflict with human convenience. We've moved from torturing cats we feared to surgically altering cats we love, and the cats probably aren't particularly comforted by the improved motivation. The environmental ethics of cat food production forces confrontation with the ecological costs of modern cat love. Producing the meat-based diets cats require involves industrial animal agriculture with substantial greenhouse gas emissions, land use, and water consumption. The pet food industry is estimated to produce emissions equivalent to millions of cars annually. Some estimates suggest that cats and dogs in the United States alone consume protein and calories equivalent to what could feed millions of humans, raising justice questions about resource allocation. Environmentally conscious cat owners face genuine dilemmas. Cats need meat to survive, but meat production drives environmental degradation. Solutions like insect-based or lab-grown cat food remain experimental. Medieval people never considered the environmental impact of cats because environmental thinking didn't exist. Modern people must grapple with the reality that loving cats contributes to systems harming all life on Earth. There's no easy resolution, just uncomfortable awareness that even seemingly pure acts of compassion have hidden costs distributed across global systems. The legal concept of cats as companion animals, rather than mere property, represents significant jurisprudential evolution with practical implications for custody disputes, damages calculations, and abuse prosecutions. Courts increasingly recognize that cats have value beyond market price, awarding compensation for emotional distress and loss of companionship when cats are wrongfully killed. Custody disputes over cats and divorces sometimes involve considerations similar to child custody, examining which party can better meet the animal's needs. Animal abuse laws treat cat cruelty more seriously than property destruction. This legal evolution reflects and reinforces cats' elevated social status, but creates inconsistencies. Courts recognize cats' emotional significance, while property law still treats them as owned objects that can be bought and sold. Medieval legal systems struggled to categorize cats. Modern legal systems struggle with the same problem, just with greater sophistication and awareness of the stakes. The law slowly catches up to social reality, but the gap between how we feel about cats and how legal systems treat them remains significant. The impact of cats on human child development and family dynamics has become a subject of scientific investigation with complex findings. Studies suggest that growing up with cats can teach empathy, responsibility, and provide emotional support, but also that cats can trigger allergies affecting child health and development. Cats in families become part of sibling dynamics, caregiving education, and social-emotional learning. However, the relationship between cats and young children requires supervision and management in ways medieval families likely didn't consider necessary. Modern parenting culture treats interactions between cats and children as requiring careful negotiation of boundaries and safety, reflecting both increased awareness of animal welfare and heightened anxiety about child safety. Medieval children likely encountered cats more casually, with less supervision and more tolerance for minor injuries from scratches or bites. The modern approach is safer for both children and cats, but also more labor-intensive, requiring adults to constantly mediate between species. Whether this produces better outcomes or just more anxious parents is debatable. The future of cat conservation, both of domestic cats as a population and of wild felid species, presents interconnected challenges that require coordinated global responses. Domestic cat overpopulation in some regions coexists with population pressures on wild cats, sharing habitats with humans. Genetic diversity concerns affect both domestic breeds suffering from inbreeding and wild populations fragmented by habitat loss. Disease transmission between domestic and wild cats threatens both groups. Climate change affects all felids by altering prey availability and habitat suitability. These challenges require thinking about cats as part of interconnected ecological and social systems, rather than isolated pets or wild animals. Medieval people had no concept of conservation or extinction. Modern people understand these concepts, but struggle to implement effective responses. The question isn't whether we should preserve cats, both domestic and wild, but how to do so while addressing competing interests and limited resources. The answer will require scientific knowledge, political will, and ethical frameworks that take seriously our obligations to species we've both persecuted and cherished throughout history. The phenomenon of cat therapy, or feline-assisted therapy, has become formalized in medical and psychological treatment contexts, with cats specifically trained to provide comfort in hospitals, nursing homes, and therapeutic settings. This professionalization of what was once informal companionship reflects both evidence-based medicine's requirements for documentation and insurance coverage and the elevation of human-animal bonds to legitimate therapeutic interventions. Medieval people sometimes found comfort in cats, but would never have considered this medical treatment. Modern healthcare systems recognize and reimburse for cat-assisted therapy in some contexts. This represents remarkable progress in acknowledging the mental health benefits of human-animal relationships. However, it also raises questions about the cats involved. Are they workers? Do they consent to their therapeutic roles? Are their welfare needs adequately considered? The cats themselves presumably just experience being around various humans in different settings, unaware they're participating in therapeutic interventions. We've enlisted cats in healthcare provision without consulting them, which is very on-brand for human-cat relationships throughout history. The cultural symbolism of cats in contemporary political and social movements demonstrates their continued power as meaningful symbols, though the meanings have inverted from medieval associations. Cat imagery appears in feminist movements celebrating independence and rejecting patriarchal control. Queer communities embrace cats as symbols of nonconformity and resistance to heteronormative expectations. Environmental activists use cats to illustrate both conservation challenges and the impacts of human expansion. Anarchist and anti-authoritarian movements adopt cat symbolism to represent autonomy and rejection of hierarchy. These symbolic deployments share the medieval recognition that cats mean something beyond their biological nature, but the meanings have flipped. Where medieval Christianity saw demonic rebellion, modern progressive movements see liberatory independence. Cats didn't change, human interpretive frameworks did. The cats themselves remain politically indifferent, which is probably the most cat thing possible. They've been conscripted into human ideological conflicts across centuries while maintaining complete disinterest in those conflicts, which is either admirable consistency or confirmation that cats truly don't care about anything except their immediate material needs. The intersection of artificial intelligence and cat care represents the cutting edge of technologically mediated human-animal relationships, with implications both practical and philosophical. AI-powered litter boxes analyze waste for health indicators, alerting owners to potential medical issues before symptoms appear. Machine learning algorithms interpret cat vocalizations and body language, translating feline communication into human-understandable alerts. Computer vision systems track cat activity levels and behavioral changes that might indicate illness or distress. These technologies promise better cat care through early disease detection and behavioral monitoring. But they also transform the human-cat relationship into something increasingly mediated by algorithmic interpretation. Medieval people feared cats partially because they couldn't understand them. Modern technology promises to make cats fully comprehensible through data analysis and pattern recognition. Whether this enhanced understanding deepens or diminishes the human-cat bond remains an open question. There's something to be said for relationships that retain mystery and require intuitive understanding rather than algorithmic translation. The bioethics of cat cloning forces consideration of questions medieval philosophers never imagined and modern ethics struggles to answer. Several companies now offer commercial cat cloning services, creating genetic duplicates of beloved deceased pets for grieving owners willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars. Proponents argue this allows irreplaceable relationships to continue and advances scientific knowledge. Critics contend that clones aren't truly the same individual, since personality develops through experience, not just genetics, and that the process requires numerous surrogate mothers and produces failed embryos, raising animal welfare concerns. The desire to resurrect dead cats through cloning reflects desperate grief and the commodification of life itself. If you can afford it, even death becomes optional. Medieval people accepted cat death as natural and inevitable. Modern biotechnology offers the possibility of defeating death through sufficient wealth and willingness to create new cats to replace lost ones. The cloned cats themselves are innocent beings caught up in human grief and technological ambition, living embodiments of our inability to accept loss and our hubris about controlling nature. The phenomenon of cat cafes in countries experiencing declining birth rates and increased social isolation suggests that cats are filling roles previously occupied by human relationships and family structures. In Japan and South Korea, where marriage and birth rates have plummeted and young people report high loneliness levels, cat cafes provide accessible social spaces and surrogate companionship. The cats become substitutes for children, partners, or friends that economic and social pressures make difficult to maintain. This isn't necessarily unhealthy. Cats provide genuine emotional benefits, but it reflects profound social dysfunction that people increasingly turn to interspecies relationships because intraspecies ones seem unattainable. Medieval people had cats alongside human families and communities. Modern people sometimes have cats instead of human connection. The cats benefit from the attention and care, but they're also unwitting participants in addressing human social failures they didn't cause and can't truly resolve. We've made cats responsible for our emotional well-being in ways that probably aren't fair to either species. The debate over breeding bans for cats with genetic health problems highlights tensions between aesthetic preferences, breed preservation, and animal welfare. Some jurisdictions have banned or restricted breeding of cats with extreme brachycephalic features, folded ears, or dwarfism due to associated health issues. Breed enthusiasts argue these bans threaten breed diversity and cultural heritage, that responsible breeding can minimize problems, and that breed-specific bans are simplistic responses to complex issues. Animal welfare advocates counter that continuing to breed cats with features causing chronic suffering is indefensible regardless of aesthetic or cultural arguments, and that breed preservation shouldn't trump individual animal welfare. Medieval cat breeding was essentially non-existent beyond natural selection. Modern breeding has created cats that medieval people would probably consider deformed or monstrous, except we call them pedigree and charge premium prices. The fact that we've bred cats into forms that cause them suffering for our aesthetic pleasure suggests that modern cat love isn't always superior to medieval cat pragmatism. At least medieval people didn't deliberately create suffering cats for entertainment value. The role of cats in prison rehabilitation programs represents an unexpected application of human-animal bonds to criminal justice, with inmates caring for cats as part of therapeutic and vocational training. Studies show that prisoners who participate in cat care programs demonstrate improved emotional regulation, reduced violence, and better social skills. The programs benefit cats by socializing shelter animals and improving adoption prospects while offering inmates opportunities for meaningful work and emotional connection. This represents a remarkable inversion of historical patterns. Medieval authorities associated cats with criminals and witches as fellow outcasts. Modern programs pair cats with incarcerated people for mutual rehabilitation. The cats presumably don't care about the moral status of their caregivers, treating prisoners the same as anyone else who feeds and pets them. This feline indifference to human moral categories is actually useful therapeutically. Cats offer acceptance without judgment, which can be transformative for people accustomed to condemnation. Medieval society burned cats for association with moral transgression. Modern society uses cats to help people move beyond moral transgression. The emerging field of cat genomics promises to answer fundamental questions about domestication, breed formation, and genetic disease, while raising new ethical dilemmas about designer cats and genetic enhancement.